When you don't go to Geico.com, car insurance can seem intense. Like breakup R&B intense.
I thought you said you loved the sweater that I got you. If you didn't, you could have told me.
Geico makes it easy. Just go to Geico.com anytime to update or check your policy without all the extra drama.
I even had a gift receipt.
Blog Talk Radio.
Blessings from the Darkness is an eclectic collection of writings by a talented and diverse group of writers and published authors in dedication of and in support of our dearest friend, the award-winning and best-selling author Yvonne Mason and her son. All sales of this anthology, present and future, are donated to her in support of her son, who at the time of this publication has been ill and out of work and struggling to support his family due to an undiagnosed illness. Yvonne has been an inspiration, selflessly supportive, and a dear friend to many aspiring writers and indie authors. She believes in paying it forward, offering her knowledge and insights and friendship to kindred souls. Yvonne has a saying: she threatens to let loose the flying monkeys when there is wrongness in the lives of those near and dear to her. So after bringing us together for a successful and fun-filled double anthology by Yvonne, including notable authors and first-time published writers, and after learning about the continued troubles of her son and his family, we came together as such monkeys to fly free, far, and wide in what we do best. G.L. Lentz. This book can be purchased at Amazon.com, Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and www.blackbedsheetbooks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That is Blessings from the Darkness, and the ad is correct. All of the proceeds from that book that was published by my friend Nicholas Grabowski and Black Bedsheet Books does go to my son to help support his family. Sadly, they still do not know what is wrong with him. So we just plod on and hope for the best. This is Off the Chain. I am your host, Yvonne Mason. Tonight we have two fun-filled hours with two wonderful, wonderful, wonderful authors. The 8 o'clock hour, I have author Sandy Wright, and on the 9 o'clock hour, we have author Ann Sontheimer Murphy, Reboot. If you all remember the last time when I tried to interview her, her telephone, for whatever reason, it must have been her cell phone, became possessed. And it sounded like she was down in a well. And I do not believe in doing that to my guests because they deserve their voice. So we're bringing her back on at 9 o'clock. At this hour, I want to introduce you to author Sandy Wright, who moved to Arizona 17 years ago and fell in love with the Southwest desert, including all of its Native American influences. After she took a trip to Sedona, that little germ of a novel took place in her head. And she says, I quote, "I love to take ordinary characters and put them in extraordinary situations that change their view of the world." So her first novel, Song of the Ancients, introduces witchcraft, shamanism, seen through the eyes of an ordinary woman. And then readers interested in witchcraft or just a dark, eerie tale, I guarantee you will enjoy this paranormal suspense. And what makes this even more fun, this book was written by a real-life Wiccan High Priestess. Sandy is the winner of the Pacific Northwest Fantasy on the Far Side Paranormal and Orange Road Paranormal Romance Contest, and Song of the Ancients was published in 2015. It is available in print and ebook. And I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I read this book. I stayed up all night reading this book because I could not put it down. It was amazing. So, without further ado, hello, my dear friend Sandy. How are you?
I'm fine, Yvonne. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, it is my privilege, my friend. I'm tickled to death you're here because we have got so many things to talk about. We're going to jump right in. As you know, you've listened to the show a couple of times, I don't interview my guest in the old dry, what is your book about, yada, 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 and put everybody to sleep. I want people to know the person behind the book. So I'm going to ask you, if you will, to explain to the audience, first of all, what made you move to Arizona?
Well, my husband and I both got laid off from our jobs in Kansas City. That was the main reason. And I had gone to school at Arizona State, and I just loved Arizona, and I had some relatives out here. So when we started putting our heads together and saying, okay, now we don't have to stay in the state where we were born, where would we like to go? And I mentioned Arizona, and he said, okay. So he got a headhunter and started looking for jobs in Arizona and got one. And we moved out here with one brand new job, a 2-year-old baby, no house, and found all of it and settled in within 30 days.
It was meant for you to be in Arizona.
It was meant to be.
I also found out in my diggings, because you know how I am, I dig around and find out all these little tidbits about my guest. You have a journalism background. Tell our audience about that a little bit.
I went to the University of Missouri, which has one of the top journalism schools in the country, or did when I graduated anyway. And I was a magazine and news editorial major. And I worked in newspaper and in corporate communications for the first decade of my career after I got out of school. And then it just didn't pay quite well enough, so I went into advertising and then finally into sales, all with a large telecommunications company, and stayed there for about 15 years until, unfortunately, the last one that I worked for, the owners, the CEO was indicted for fraud and embezzlement, and it became the TV movie Fun with Dick and Jane, if you're familiar with that one, and
yes.
I retired.
That would give one cause to pause for a moment. Do I really want to stay here or not?
It would. And I said I don't want to be in corporate life anymore. I've spent 20 years working corporate. I don't want to do it anymore. So I was a substitute teacher for about 8 years after I retired from corporate, and then during that time I started writing and have never looked back.
Well, also the little tidbits that I found is you made a statement that your life actually began at 40 years old. Elaborate on that, because that story is so romantic, and you know I don't do romantic, but that is a very, very romantic story, and I think the audience would really like to hear this story.
Okay. I was single until I was 40, and I had dated a lot, but I hadn't really found anybody that I was really serious about. And a woman, I played soccer, and a woman on my co-ed soccer team introduced me to one of her teammates, and we went out on a blind date and hit it off. And, after about 3 months, I found out that I was pregnant for the first time at 40, and so we had a marriage and a baby in the first year.
And it seems to have worked well for you.
We've been married for 25 years, so it worked really well.
Now, again, in my little diggings, ladies and gentlemen, for those of y'all that don't know, I am also a bounty hunter and a researcher, so I find out these things that most people wouldn't think was important or wouldn't pay attention to. But this is part of who Sandy is and where Sandy is in her life. You not only had a new baby, but you also had a stepson, correct?
Yes, I did, 9 years old.
When he graduated from high school, there was something that happened that has stayed with you. What happened the day he graduated from high school?
When we got up in the bleachers for graduation, I sat down next to a woman, never met her before, and about as before the graduation class even walked out, she was crying. She was just bawling her head off, and and I felt sorry for her. So I reached over and hugged her and said, "Is there anything you want to talk about?" And she said, "I am just so thankful that my son is walking in graduation because 3 days ago he tried to commit suicide, and I didn't know whether I would even have him today." So that's what it is. And, of course, by then I'm in tears also, and my entire family and stepfamily are looking at me going, "What is wrong with this woman?" So I sat with her instead of with my family during the graduation, and we held hands and cried together, and she pointed out her son, and I pointed out my stepson when they walked in graduation ceremony. And I don't know how she is now, but I really felt like that was a time that we were meant to be together, and I was glad that she had somebody to share that emotion with, because it was an awful lot for her to keep inside alone.
And she needed you. You were the one that she needed because you asked the right question. And sometimes we don't ask the right question, so people don't give us the right answer. And it takes someone with you that has an open heart, that understands people, that asks that right question. And I'm sure that you have stayed with her and her heart all of these years, because I'm sure it was like a floodgate opened.
I hope so. I hope I have.
Did you never saw her again then after that?
No, and I asked my son I asked my stepson if he knew the family, and he didn't, which kind of surprised me because this is a small town in Wisconsin. But he wasn't familiar with him, so I didn't, and I didn't, after we talked about it, I didn't remember her name, so I haven't had a way to look her up. But, these things have a way of coming around, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if someday I run into her again. And
it could be this radio show. This radio show might be the catalyst. Now, in the introduction, go ahead, sweetheart.
No, that's fine.
Okay. In the introduction, I said that you are a Wiccan High Priestess, and also talks about shaman. First, before we talk about you being a Wiccan High Priestess, explain to our listening audience what shaman is.
Well, actually, for a Native American, we wouldn't necessarily use the term shaman. That is a little bit insulting, and so we would probably call him a medicine man instead, which is what I call him in my book. But that has a whole different connotation for a lot of people. So when I do the introduction, like the book blurb and so on, I use the word shaman, which is not the term he would use. But they are usually one of the high council or high people in the particular tribe, and they are looked at not only for magic and solving problems through magic, but also through most of the medicine that is done for the tribe as well, and the healing.
And they also, are they not also the wise men of the tribe that people go to for advice and counsel and that sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. And if it were a Celtic, for a Celtic counterpart, it would be a druid. So yes, he is the counselor, and usually an elder.
And then that brings me to my next question of being the high priest. See, I'm tired, can't talk. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, let me get my tongue untied. First of all, if you will, describe to our audience, for those that don't know, what Wicca is.
Wicca is just a more modern term for witchcraft, although not every single person who is into witchcraft is Wicca. They could be, they could be pagan, they could be Druid, they could be Norse, or there's a whole lot of different pantheons that they could be that would not necessarily be called Wiccan. But that is the more modern, this last century is when Wicca came upon us. But I call myself a witch because not only do I do spell working, but I also do spiritual work. And there are some precepts in Wicca that I don't 100% agree with. For instance, in harm none, I believe that you harm none as much as you can, but if something is harming you, you are able to defend yourself from that. So it's not 100% harm none. So I go by the term witch instead.
Now, how did you become a high priestess?
Well, I've been studying witchcraft and Wicca for probably 15, 16 years. And at first I started as a solitary, which means that I just practiced by myself, and I did all of my own magic alone. And then I joined a local coven. I'm in Phoenix. And I joined a local coven and stayed with them for 8 years. And it was what's called a degreed coven, where you study for a year and a day and you get a first degree, and then you study further for a year and a day and get a second degree, and you move on up through 3 degrees doing that. And I did all of that. And then the last of those 8 years, for probably the last 3 years, I was the high priestess, which is kind of like the leader or the elder in the group. And then last year I left that coven and I joined a new one in a different tradition, which is called reclaiming, which was actually started by a woman named Starhawk. Her most famous book is called Spiral Dance. And that coven is, first of all, it's huge. My last coven had 13. This one like for Samhain, we're having 43 people. But I'm not a high priestess. Yeah, it's big. And one of the reasons that it's big is that it doesn't require the degree study that my last traditional eclectic coven did. Reclaiming doesn't have the same structure that some of the others do. It's much more open, and everyone is considered equal. There is not a high priest or a high priestess. Everybody contributes. Everybody does magic. Everybody writes ritual. And I was ready for that change. And I have to say I'm really enjoying the reclaiming this last year.
If someone wanted, or I don't want to say wanted to be a witch, because you either are or you're not. But if someone wanted to, like you, join a coven and didn't know how to go about it, what would they do? Because
well, yeah. First of all, I'm not sure that you either are or you aren't. I think you can become Wiccan. You can certainly become Wiccan. I think you can find yourself as a witch if you choose to, also through study and practice. But the main reason that I became one is I looked at the other organized religions around me and I said, in most of them, a woman cannot be the leader. In a lot of them, a woman is a secondary participant, while her husband or the men in the religious group make the decisions and put down the rules. And I didn't like that. And the other thing is that in a lot of the other religions, they are pretty much male-centric in their spirituality also. You know, God is male. There's only one. He's a supreme being. He gives you guidance on what you do in your life, and you follow it and are accepted, or you don't follow it and you break with the church. And none of that is true in Wicca. Wicca has both male and female deities that we worship. They're equal. You can go to a deity and work with him or her to do whatever it is that you need to do. There may be one that you need for healing. There may be one that you need for warrior spirit. And you go to different deities depending on what you need at the time. And they can be male or female. And as we showed with being High Priestess, you can also be the head of your Wiccan group or your witch group, male or female. And so I really liked that. And that was the main thing that got me into studying witchcraft in the first place. So I think that anybody who wants to study can, and you can do it on your own, or you can look through, like on WitchFox Online, or different pagan ads that would be in occult stores or New Age stores. And you can probably find a group. If you're in a town or a city, you can find a group. It may take some work because we don't advertise, but you will be able to find a group if you want one.
They are there, ladies and gentlemen. Trust
me,
they
are there.
Are. Now, and I found out another little tidbit about you, actually two. And the question is, are you a procrastinator?
Yes, I am. I do very well under last-minute deadlines.
Because I know the world is filled with procrastinators. And as Scarlett says in Gone with the Wind, tomorrow is another day.
That's right.
So see, ladies and gentlemen, even authors are procrastinators. Trust me, they are. And before the show, you told me something, but before we talk about that incident, in 2015 you released your first book, Song of the Ancients. And I want you to talk about this book. What possessed you to write such an awe-inspiring, in-your-face, grab you by the throat book that you can't put down? How did you get from point A to point B?
Well, the spark of inspiration was Harry Potter, because this was as the last, I think book 7 had not come out, and I'm not sure whether the Half-Blood Prince, I don't believe it had come out. It came out while I was writing my book. And I was a big Severus Snape fan. And I thought that the treatment that she gave him in this book was not what I would have done, because he is such a complex, gray person, not black, not white. He's playing on both sides, and he has good points and he has bad points, and he has to balance all the time. And I felt like she had kind of portrayed him up through the first 5 books as the bad guy. And I knew there was going to be more to the story, but it took a long time for it to come out. And, he killed Dumbledore, for heaven's sake, before we had any idea why. So I decided that I was going to take a character that was like Snape, that was very much a gray character, that you weren't sure whether he would ever be on your side or not 100%. He would certainly always be on his own side. And I was going to write a book based on that dichotomy of character. And that's what Nicholas Arenda is in my book. He is my version of Severus Snape in the witch world.
And I'm going to tell you, ladies,
go ahead.
Real quick, if y'all have not read this Song of the Ancients, trust me, when you get off of this show tonight, or if you listen to it in archives, as soon as you get done listening to it, you will run and download this book, or you will go and buy this book, because you cannot put it down. Go ahead, my darling. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but this book amazed me. I loved it.
Well, I'm so glad that you liked it. I put a lot of my own life into it, although I'm not any particular character. I'm not Samantha in this book, the protagonist, by any means. But the scenes of her mother and the picture that she takes to the Samhain ceremony, those are all mine. And the two cats in the book, those are my cats. So there were a lot of things that I kind of, they say, write what you know. So I wrote witchcraft because that's what I knew. And I wrote good and evil because that's what I'd seen in my life, and just kind of blended it into a story.
It's a fantastic story. So after I finished this book, ladies and gentlemen, I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and then I found out why I was still waiting. Explain to the listening audience what happened to you and what you've had to come back from and how it has made you stronger.
Okay. The book came out in May of 2015, and I promoted it very heavily for several months, and then I started working on another book, but instead of being the second book in this series, in this paranormal suspense series, there was a book that I wanted to write that was a standalone murder suspense, so I started on it. But I didn't get very far because almost a year ago, last Thanksgiving, I had a stroke. And it was a left frontal lobe, which means that I didn't have any physical manifestations, but I had a lot of mental. I lost my words. I lost my sense of direction. I lost a lot of my use of numbers and math. And so it took me probably 6 or 7 months of working with not a therapist, but a physical therapist, to get my faculties back. And it came back in pieces. I could write blogs before I could write novels because blogs require a shorter attention span and I won't say less concentration, but you don't have to follow through for months on a storyline like you do in a novel. So I was blogging by February, but I didn't actually get back to writing until September of this year. So there was a reason for the delay. Although I still don't have the second book in the series written, but I do almost have my standalone murder suspense written. And while your editor and your publisher probably always tell you not to do that, the storyline of this book that I'm writing on is so current to today's news headlines that I felt like I had to get it out first, because it's about a man who is in military. He's going into military intelligence, and he has a lover, and he's decided he wants to get rid of his wife. So they live in Arizona. They're at the fort down in southern Arizona. And he decides that he is going to kill her and make it look like human smuggling by Mexican cartel members gone wrong. And, I mean, it feels to me like the story was just ripped out of today's headlines. Depending on who wins the election, it may be today's headline. So I decided that I would stop. Yeah, I decided I would stop and write this book and get it done and out, and then go back and do the second book in the paranormal series. So that's what I'm doing.
And coming back around to this second book in the series, when you started this book, that's outside of your comfort zone as genre, is it not?
For the paranormal or the murder suspense?
The murder.
Neither one of them, because I read a lot of suspense. I actually read more suspense than I do paranormal. So this is more like coming home than going out of comfort zone for me.
That's interesting. But you've stretched your craft because a lot of authors that you and I both know, they stay in one genre because they get comfortable in that genre. And when you step out of that genre and go into something else, sometimes it can be a little strange, a little uncomfortable. But like you said, it was normal to you because you were in journalism.
Right. And I mean, in the paranormal, I'm writing what I know in my everyday life and practice, but I'm writing what interests me most as a reader in writing the murder suspense. So they both feel really comfortable. I know that I will probably, I will pay in readership and sales on this first book, on Song of the Ancients, first because I don't have any backlist to go with it. And so as long as I don't have backlist, then you can only rely on one book sales. That's tough to do. So I know that I'll have to just promote the heck out of it when I get the second book out, especially since it's been this long.
And that's why we're going to bring you back on March the 8th.
Yes, and I appreciate that. But here's the thing. As a writer, I don't think that you can say, I am going to make my living as a writer. You can say, I love to write, and therefore I'm going to do it, and I hope that I can make a living, and I'm going to write as smart as I can so that I can make a living at it. But it shouldn't be your primary goal. You should love what you're writing instead. And so I am definitely living my primary goal. I will probably not make a huge retirement sum out of any one of those books. But it doesn't matter. I'm getting out what I want to get out, and the people who read it like it, and that is just so gratifying. I've gotten I don't think I've gotten any bad reviews. They've all been 4 and 5 star. So, they're liking what I'm doing. If it takes me a long time to do it, can't help it. That's just life.
Hey, it's worth. I wait a year and a half on. I'm still waiting on George R. Martin for the next in his series.
Exactly,
I wait a year and a half on Tim Dorsey. So what's another day for you?
Exactly.
But that's what good writing is about. If anybody can crank out, and sadly, this is what happens in traditional publishing. Your well-known authors like the John Sanfords and the Parkers and the I can't think of them all. My husband. Right.
Yeah.
They have to crank out 4 books a year. That's a book a quarter, and your mind doesn't rest from one episode to the next, and it's almost impossible to not repeat yourself in your books. And this is what happens. It's the same storyline, same plot, same characters, just different names, different city.
Right.
And so
and if they're really good, if they're really popular, then they have ghostwriters or co-writers, and that helps too. But and the other thing is, I think your writing, it has to come out of your own life experiences, and so I'm still having those, and so sometimes I have to wait for the life experiences to catch up with the book too, or I have to make room for those life experiences as I'm researching a book. For instance, the next one in the series, in the paranormal series, is going to be called Stone of the Ancients, and it's going to be based in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, England, that area, because that's where at the end of the first book, I have Samantha and Nicholas traveling back to England to meet with the Witch Council of Elders. And so it's probably going to end up being based in Wales because that's the part that I'm most interested in. But I want to go over and do the actual research on that as soon as possible. Also because my ties are Scottish, and so I want to go and do my family research as well and be able to put some of that in the book. So the third book is going to be based in Hawaii and have the goddess Pele, and I've already done the research for that. We went to Hawaii last year, and I've done a lot of studying on Goddess Pele so far. So that one will be ready. And then the third one is going to be, I don't know where. It's going to be somewhere around the ancient land bridge of the first people. So it could be anywhere from Alaska to Siberia. And I haven't done the research on that yet, so I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to stage it. But somewhere around that land bridge, which has since disappeared.
That is, see, again, my as they say, my spidey senses are tingling because I can't wait to get my hands on books and read them.
Well, and each of the I had decided before I ever wrote the first book that I wanted a 4-book series. I wanted each one of the books in the series to represent one of the elements. So this last one was earth, and the stones are actually going to be. Let's see. This one was wind because it's Song of the Ancients. I'm sorry. The next one is going to be earth, and then Pele will be fire, and then the last one, because it's ice, will be water. And the other thing is that I wanted each one of the books to be representative of a power site somewhere around the world. So this first one is in Sedona, and it uses all of the vortexes and the vortex energy in Sedona. And the next one will be Standing Stones, and then we'll have the volcano magic and so on. So, I've given a lot of thought to the series, even though the whole thing's not down on paper yet.
For the benefit of the listeners that don't understand the earth, wind, fire, and water, explain that to them so that then the books will make sense as they start coming out.
Okay. First of all, when you cast a magical circle in witchcraft, you call the 4 quarters, the 4 directional quarters, and each one of those quarters have an element associated with it. For instance, east is air, north is earth. And so that's the first part of it. But the second part of it is a Native American tie-in because they do very much the same thing. And they bow to the 4 quarters of the earth plus sky and earth, so there are actually 6, and they worship the same type of elemental tie-in that we do as witches.
So you have earth, wind, fire, and water.
Yes.
And then when you add the Native American, you
have
the
sky. You have sky and Mother Earth.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Song of the Ancients is the very first one in this series, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it because just talking about it does not do this book justice, I'm telling you. You open this book up and you will not be putting this book down until you're through, and then you'll be like me going, okay, Sandy, when is the next book? When is the next book? When is the next book? Now, where can you be found on the Internet? How can folks keep up with you and keep up with your books and know when the next one is coming out? Tell them where they can find you.
I have a personal website. It's www.writersandy, all one word, .com. And I have everything on there from blogs to book promos, a newsletter sign-up to find out about upcoming events and books. I have potions, recipes, and some spell work on there and a whole bunch of witchy stuff as well. I also have 2 co-blogs that I work on, and one of them is called Readerlicious, like delicious, only readerlicious.com. And the other one is with 8 local Arizona authors, and it's called desertmuses.com.
And they can also find you on Facebook, correct?
They can find me on Facebook. My author page is Sandy Wright Author, And then I let people into my personal page as well, and that one is just Sandy Wright.
And I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go friend her, shame on you. This woman is fantastic.
Yeah, the only problem is on the friend me on the reader website, because the personal website, I'm at my 5,000, so I'm having to turn people down.
Well, and some that you don't interact with on a regular basis, they probably don't care if you whittle them down any at all. Now,
yeah.
based on what we've talked about tonight, based on your life beginning at 40 and getting married, having the baby, having a stepson, having a stroke, what would you tell someone that came up to you and said, I have this vision and this dream, but
I don't have enough time, or but my family is at home, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
I would tell them, make time, and make time now, because waiting for retirement to do the things that you really dream about doing and really love to do doesn't give you enough time. So if you're 25, start now. If you're 45, start now. It's never too late to start, but the earlier you can start, the richer your life will be. Even if you have to carve out 2 hours of writing between 10 and midnight every night, just do it. And the other thing that I tell writers is, that it's a hard lesson to learn, but you have to write every day. And if you don't, it's going to slip away from you. And it's just like exercising any other muscle. You have to exercise the writer muscle as well, and practice and practice. I play piano. Okay, I can relearn my piano technique and then let it go for 9 months or a year, and I have to start all over again and relearn it all over again, including the sight reading and everything else. So it's just like that. Practice, 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 because that's what will make you better and faster.
And if the journey changes, you've had to take a couple of detours in your life, but do you agree that those detours have actually made you better at your craft or given you a better insight into your craft? Yes.
I think that the detours that I've had to make they've made me much more empathetic, and they've also made me look at the world differently too, with a little bit more urgency than I had before. So, and there's a silver lining to everything, and that's the other thing is, let me back up for a minute. My stroke, I believe, my doctor said it was caused by a combination of medications, because I was on hormone replacement therapy, which, half the women 40 or over are on hormone replacement. And then I got a bad cold, and so I took a prednisone derivative to get rid of the swelling. And he says that's like a time bomb cocktail for your head, which I had no idea. And they were both prescribed by the same doctor, so evidently he didn't know either. But the doctor says that's what it was caused by. I personally believe it was caused by stress, because I had a couple of really bad things going on in my life then, and I didn't handle them very well. I let my stress level get out of control. And I should know better than that, because I meditate, I know how to do all of the things that you do to control stress, but I didn't do them. So that's a warning that I would give to your female readers out there, especially, or listeners, is be careful. Control your stress. Keep yourself, if you can't be happy, at least be optimistic, because you do have control over whether you're optimistic or pessimistic. And it will keep you happier.
And do you or do you not agree that we create our own happiness and contentment. No one else can do that for us. We have to do that.
Absolutely.
We've got to find that from within.
Yes. Yes. And you have to insist on it. You have to just say, you, negative Nellie, leave me alone. Go away. I will interact with you when your attitude changes or when you can control it. And until then, my health is more important to me than your problems.
And as women, sad but true, as women, we tend to take on the problems of the world as our own, and we tend to worry about what other people think about us, and it really doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks about us. It's how we feel within ourselves. And I would dare say that all of us are very beautiful, successful women.
Mhm. And that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. And that's the only thing that you can control. Even if you have psychosis around you, which I believe is happening more and more. Even if you have some really unhealthy people that you're dealing with, whether it's at work or in your family or whatever it is, you simply cannot take on that psychosis, and you certainly can't change it. The only thing that you can change is your reaction to it.
You are a woman after my own heart, because I preach that daily. That and the things that we can change, we don't need to worry about them. We just need to change them. The things that we cannot change, we need to just drop that baggage at the door and go on about our merry little way and be happy within ourselves. Because if we worry about the things we cannot change, don't you think we're cheating ourselves and those around us that love us?
Oh, yes. You could be cheating yourself out of a life.
And I tell my children, I'm going to have them dragging and me kicking and screaming to exit this life, because I'm going to stay around long enough not to just be a burden to the kids, but the grandkids and then the great-grandkids. So I'm very happy with me right now.
Yeah, I tell my youngest son that I'm going to stay around long enough to be a real pain in his ass as he becomes an adult. So just be ready for it.
So there'll be no more strokes for you, correct?
There will not be. No.
Now, have you been able to get the faculties that were affected by the stroke back 100%, or do you still have days that you struggle?
I'd say I'm back 95%. The things that I am still struggling with, I probably always will. My short-term memory is not as good as it was before, but it stays as sharp as you get older anyway. I still have some problems with being dyslexic with my numbers, and that is a brain and eye thing that I can work with a therapist, with an eye therapist, to correct, and I'm going to do that. And the other thing is that I don't try to multitask as much as I did. I still do it, but I tend now, especially if it's really important work or detail work, to just do one thing at a time. And so, that's kind of anathema to our lifestyle, but it feels healthier to me to do that.
Well, and not only that, but
being bombarded.
You made a very good point, Sandy. I'm 65, and I have found that sometimes my short-term memory, half the time I can't remember my name, much less the children's name, or even the dog's name. But I've always been dyslexic, and I fought that for years, and I finally just embraced it and said, okay, I'm depending on my editor and my publisher to fix my words for me, because I get them twisted and turned, and I think I've put things out there that aren't out there, and I haven't even had a stroke. It's just my brain short circuits. But I agree with you. As we grow older, these things happen. I could multitask. I could do 15 things at one time. I can't anymore. But
right.
That doesn't.
Right.
But But that doesn't mean we're useless. It just means that we have aged very well, and we just embrace it and keep moving forward with our dream. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, absolutely. And it was interesting because while I was in the hospital, the neurologist that cared for me, I said, I'm a writer. What do I do if I can't write? And he said, be very, very glad that you are, because most people, their vocabulary and word usage would be down here, and he puts his hand down, at his waist, and he goes, yours is up here. So even if you lose a small percentage of that, you're still going to be better off than, 80% of the population. And that was that was such a mood lifter for me. So
was it like
once he told me
off?
that, yeah. And once he said that, then I said, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. I'm going to concentrate on resting and letting my body heal itself, and I'm simply going to let that worry go. And so I called my husband, and I said, okay, I have another night and a day in the hospital. I've been reading the last book of Game of Thrones. Would you bring it in? I'm going to read it while I'm here. I don't know if you've read that series, right? It's heavy duty. It's heavy duty. And it took me a long time to get through that last book, but I read it in the hospital, doggone it. So I think that was a pretty good recovery.
And of course, your mental attitude was not one of a defeatist mental attitude. Oh, poor pitiful me, I've had this stroke. I'm not the same that I was, but indeed you are still the same that you were. It just had, your brain just had to redirect itself. But and I have a woman who's in one of my local writer groups, and she has also had a stroke. This woman is the best writer and the sharpest conversationalist that I know of any of my friends. She just didn't let it get her down. She did the therapy, and she worked her way through it, and that's just what you have to do. So, in tying all this up, ladies and gentlemen, what Sandy and I, and I'm going to be presumptuous here, Sandy, what Sandy and I are trying to tell our listeners is this, that no matter the challenge that you have in your life, and we all have challenges, and if you say you don't, then you're lying to yourself. That's a challenge within itself. That no matter the challenges, that no matter what is going on in your life, what imperfection or flaw that you have, that doesn't delineate you from being the best that you can be. It's not an excuse not to live your dream, not to pursue your dream, because if you pursue that dream, and Sandy has had to take detours, I've had to take detours, but we kept pursuing our dream, so we succeeded. And if you don't pursue it, if you just throw your hands up and say, well, I can't, it's just too hard, or I'm too busy, or I'm too this, or I'm too that, or whatever excuse you want to come up to, there's no good reason. It's a piss-poor excuse. You failed. Am I right, Sandy?
Yes. There's never a reason not to strive. Is what I would say, and no matter how much you succeed, you will have succeeded that much more than if you didn't try. So there is absolutely no reason not to strive in the first place. And I have so many friends who say, oh, that's great, but I just don't have time. Make time, carve out time. Do what makes your heart sing, because when you get to be like when you're 65 or 70 or 75 or 80 or however long we're going to live, you look back, and those are the things that you're going to regret, the things that you say, gosh, I wish I had. So do them now.
You took the word right. See, you're already in my head. Took those words right out of my head and from my head to your mouth. And ladies and gentlemen, I say this at every show. At the end of our days, when we're laying there, getting ready to breathe our last, and we say, I shoulda, woulda, coulda. Well, then it's too late. And I've seen it happen
I think
time
that's why,
and time. Go ahead.
That's why people are afraid of dying, because they have things that they still want to accomplish. And so, make it your goal to be able to die in peace, knowing that you've accomplished what you want to, and love the people that you've wanted to, and let them know that they're loved.
So on that note, and you're going to hang around with me, right?
I will.
For the next hour. Ladies and gentlemen, my 8 o'clock guest has been author Sandy Wright, who I just absolutely adore. And you will, too, once you read her work. You are so welcome. Now, I'm going to, this is Off the Chain, by the way, and I am your host, Yvonne Mason, and we do get off the chain. We don't stick to a script, nor do we, shall we say, sugarcoat anything. If it's a platform that we want to discuss, we discuss it. And those of you who've been with me from the beginning know that when I bring a guest on, I just don't talk about their craft. I talk about them, because the bottom line is it's not what that person does or creates. It's the person behind the craft that is important, because without that person, that craft would not be there. So you're not going to hear me talk about all the dry, usual interview questions that put you to sleep. I want to get into that person's head. I want you to feel like you personally know that person. So I'm going to introduce you to our reboot guest. The other night when I had her on, we've decided that the gremlins were in her telephone, and I did not want her to be cheated out of her spot on the show. And it is author Ann Sontheimer Murphy. She writes romance from, as she says, sweet to heat, from historical to contemporary. Now, she grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in the old river town of St. Joseph, Missouri, where the past always seems close enough to touch. And her grandmother, this just tickles me to death. Sandy, wait till you hear this. Her grandmother shared stories of love and life, and then Granny added to this quiver of arrows. She carried Miss Leanne down to the local beauty shop when she went to get her hair done. Now, there's nothing in the world, for those of y'all that are old enough to know, when you went to the beauty shop with Grandma, you talked about things that one didn't talk about in polite company or mixed company. So Leanne learned more than any child should about romance, and as soon as she could, she started doing her own field research into that subject. Leanne is a member of Romance Writers of America, Missouri Writers Guild, and the Ozark Writers League. She earned a degree in both communication arts and history from Missouri Southern State University, as well as a degree from Crowder College. Leanne spent a decade working in broadcast media. She's interviewed everyone from pro league baseball players to country music icons and even politicians. Now she lives in a small Missouri town in what passes for the suburbs. Her husband, Roy, and her 3 children share her life along with an adorable Jack Russell Terrier named Jackson. Hey, Leanne, I'm so glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back.
I'm telling you, did you get rid of the gremlins?
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. Hey, I'm using a different telephone and everything just to be safe.
Oh, right. Sandy, she sounded like she was down in a well, and every time I'd ask her a question, and she'd go in and out, and I'm going, we are not having this. Got to bring Leanne back. Now, Leanne, last time we talked a little bit about your history of going to school and being. Let's start with Grandma, because I love this story. You could tell it 100 times, and it would still just tickle me to death. Tell our audience how your love for hot, steamy romance was birthed.
Well, I got taken along to the beauty shop with my grandmother, and as we talked about before when probably no one could hear us, back then little girls were supposed to sit and be quiet when the grown-ups talked, so I listened to everything they said, and it was very educational. Learned all kinds of things about romance and relationships well beyond my years, and I just sat there, wow. And a lot of that I'm sure I retained probably what led to me writing romance, and that's just one little facet. But my granny was a very interesting person, and whether she meant to or not, she sure introduced me to life.
Tell me a little bit about Granny. We didn't talk about Granny much the last time, but for her, I know you lived with her. You more or less lived with her because your parents both worked. She sounds like she was an absolute hoot.
She was just fantastic. She was very unique. Her dad was an English immigrant who came from England. He was in the Royal Navy. He was impressed into the Royal Navy, but he decided he wanted to come to the United States where his brothers were working in railroads, so he jumped ship in Canada and was presumably a fugitive from the English crown for the rest of his life, came to St. Joseph, Missouri, where I am from, and went to work for the railroad. Her mom was Irish, daughter of an Irish immigrant who came over during the Irish famines in the 1840s. My granny had overall a pretty hard life, but she always was cheerful, no matter what. It goes a lot with what I was listening to the last part of the program, and I thought, wow, this fits in so well, y'all's point of view and mine. My granny taught me to be cheerful, to carry on no matter what. If life knocks you down, you just get right back up and keep going. One of her favorite phrases that she handed down to us grandkids was, you just keep on keeping on.
I like that. I really do like that. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other and moving on. So was she influential in your attending all of these wonderful colleges and getting your degree? I mean, you got degrees in communication arts and history. One of those is difficult, but to get double degrees, that had to have been a challenge.
It was, and I actually made history at my college. I qualified for both the honor societies, Pi Gamma Mu for history and social science, and Sigma Tau Delta, which was for English and communication majors, and they had never had that happen before. And they were like, wow.
See, Sandy, that's a person that just, she lived that dream.
She does.
Yes. And I'm sorry I interrupted you, Leanne. What were you going to say? Finish your sentence.
Oh, I was just going to say they were amazed on campus because no one had ever done that before. A lot of students thought they were very fortunate if they made one, not both.
Well, you also went on to Crowder College and got yet another degree. What did you get
Actually,
a degree
I started
in?
at Crowder College. It's a small community college. I started at Crowder and transferred to Missouri Southern.
I envy you. I started college late in life and only got an associate's degree in criminal justice. I wanted to get a degree in forensics, but didn't happen. Maybe one day. Then you went.
There's still time.
There is still time. There is still time.
There is still time.
Then you spent a decade. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I say a decade and what I'm fixing to say a decade in, this was a time when, correct me if I'm wrong, Leanne, when it was one of those professions like law enforcement that you didn't see women in as a rule. And
that's absolutely true.
She spent a decade in broadcast media, and that was something women didn't do. Tell the audience, because this story is so fascinating, tell the audience how that happened.
It is an interesting story. I graduated from college, and I was working, as I do now, as a substitute teacher. I've done that this time 8 consecutive years, a couple years then. I graduated in May. In January, I got a call from my creative writing teacher who had been contacted by a radio station looking for someone to write ad copy, commercials. And she had suggested my name. I had never written a commercial in my life, had an interview. they handed me some facts and information and said, okay, let's see what you can do. Left me alone in a room with a typewriter, because it was that long ago, it was still a typewriter. And I thought, well, I'm going to tank, but I wrote the best facsimile of commercials I thought I could come up with, and they hired me.
Now, explain to the audience how tight a commercial has to be, because
you've
only
in 30 to 60 seconds. A lot of them are 30 seconds long. And you have to grab your listener's attention, present to them whatever the advertising, a sale, a product, whatever, in that 30 seconds, which is very short. So you have to learn to write very concisely, very tight, and get to the point, and make the point, hopefully in a memorable way.
And did that help you in your writing for readers for your books? Didn't that help you?
Oh, definitely,
take
yes.
Your plot?
Yes, it taught me to write tight, to get to the point, and not to have a lot. I'm sure I made plenty of beginning writer mistakes too, and still do. But one thing I learned early because of that job was to not have a lot of extra unnecessary information.
God love you.
In my other writing.
God love you. I have read books where an entire paragraph was dedicated to the color of a blade of grass. Grass is either green or brown.
Exactly.
Sandy, do you agree?
Yeah, but I'm surprised to hear that, because you're a romance writer. So I'm surprised. Did your editors then later go back and say, embellish, lengthen this, draw it out?
Usually they compliment me and say, you write so clean, you make my job easy.
Oh, well, that's nice. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is.
Tell the audience, because you told me some of the people that you interviewed. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this was at a time when women, especially sports figures, women didn't interview them, or politicians. Tell me how that came about. Tell our audience how that came about, that you even started on the broadcast side.
Well, I started writing ad copy, and between my interview and being offered the job, their receptionist quit, so they made it one job. Of course, receptionist more traditional, have your woman out there at the front desk answering the phone, write ad copy on the side. But I started doing some commercials, and some of the people I worked with were like, wow, you've got a good voice for radio. So they started letting me gradually do more and more. And I'll admit, I actually liked that side of it, the broadcasting, the commercials. And one of the first big interviews I did was with the then one of Missouri senators, Senator Danforth. Someone else was supposed to do the interview, but they couldn't be back at the station. So they gave me about an hour lead time. You can interview the senator. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. And it was an interesting experience because he came in like a lot of politicians do with his whole entourage, and it wasn't just him, it was like 6 other guys. And then after that, they thought I did such a good job, they began letting me do more interviews. So I interviewed John J. Ashcroft, who then was the Missouri governor, later went on to be the United States Attorney General. The baseball players were kind of interesting. They were expecting to have a guy sports writer interview them, and it was Brett Saberhagen and George Brett. At the time, they were at the top of their games, Kansas City Royals, very popular. And the first thing they did was they came in with signed pictures, and they signed the wrong names to see if I even knew who they were. And I was like, okay, guys, I know better than this, but I'm keeping these pictures, and I still have pictures with signed by the wrong people. I interviewed country music people, including Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass, Ricky Skaggs. But the radio station I worked for was relatively small, but they thought, wow, that I did a good job. I interviewed Ron Hubbard, the science fiction writer, when he came out with the book on Dianetics. That was a big deal. and I got to do that one. That was my first. We had a on-air, hour-long talk show called Perspective at the station. That was my first perspective, was talking Dianetics with Ron Hubbard.
That's interesting.
It was interesting.
Well,
and
for folks that don't know what Dianetics are, you want to explain it to them?
Yeah, I can try. It's been a long time since that interview, but because that was like mid-'80s, I think. He was known at the time for primarily his science fiction, and then he came out with his study of Dianetics, and that was new at the time. And so his publicity staff called different radio stations, and they called our station, and it was like, does anybody want to do this? I said, I'll do it. So there I was, talking about Dianetics. Basically, it's a series of ideas relating to the metaphysical connection between mind and body. A lot of the people who are in the Church of Scientology, which a lot of Hollywood actors and actresses are, they practice Dianetics. And for my small town, that was kind of an interesting concept to do a radio show on. But I like to think that I made it interesting.
Well, we lost Sandy a while ago. For whatever reason, her phone dropped us. I think she's possessed tonight, but she's called back in. Sandy, thank you for coming back on and helping me with this.
Oh, you're welcome.
Possession of the phones, ladies and gentlemen. On Off the Chain, anything can happen. Absolutely anything. But back to the Dianetics, Leanne, and I think Sandy can probably attest to this too, the mind and the body work in conjunction with each other. If we're sick, like Sandy had the stroke, if we're sick and we allow our body and our mind to work together, many times it will heal itself without artificial pharmaceuticals that are poison. Years ago, in the 90s, I had to have a hysterectomy. I was dying, and the doctor said, Yvonne, I'm going to give you an epidural, and I threatened to cut his head off with his own scalpel if he did. And I said, because I will not hurt. And he said, yes, you will. And I said, no, you don't understand. I will control my mind, and in controlling my mind, it will allow the natural endorphins to rush to the weakest part of my body, which was the incision area and where they had to go in and remove everything, and I will not hurt. And I said, and I will go home in 24 hours. He said, no, you're going to be here a week. I said, no, you don't understand what I'm telling you. Watch this. I had surgery on Tuesday. I went home on Thursday, and I never hurt. But in that retrospect of what I'm understanding you to say, if we pay attention to our mind and our body, it's a perfect union. Sandy, am I right in this?
Yes. I think as long as the mind is healthy. If the mind isn't healthy, then I'm not sure that it can meld with the body 100%.
I agree. Because think of the mind as an engine on a train or an engine in your car. If it's not working right, it can't move the vehicle, which is your body.
Right.
What do you think, Leanne?
Oh, I totally agree. When I have twin daughters that are now 20. When they were born, I had a C-section, and they told me, you won't be out of bed for like 2 days. And I thought, no. I said, no, I'll be out of bed in the morning. And they thought, oh, yeah, right, but I was, because I just basically concentrated and willed myself, I am going to do this. I can do this. I can heal enough to be out of this bed, and I was.
And in that process of getting up, the body actually healed faster.
Oh, yeah.
Because the heart was working, the liver was working, the kidneys were working, the blood was flowing, the lungs were working, the tissue was closing up. So you actually healed yourself faster by being mobile.
Yes, definitely.
So there's something to say for that. I would have loved to have sat in on that conversation. I would have had a ball with that one. Now, but then y'all know me, I'm kind of weird anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Off the Chain. I'm your host, Yvonne Mason, and on the 8 o'clock hour, we had author Sandy Wright, and I forgot to say thank you, Sandy, for coming on the show. I appreciate you being here as my guest host to talk with Leanne. The 9 o'clock hour, we're talking to author Ann Sontheimer Murphy. And those of y'all that have listened to the show enough know that I have my notes, but it's not scripted because we talk about anything and we go off the chain. And we're talking with Leanne and her years in broadcasting and some of the interesting people that she interviewed at a time in history when women were not in broadcasting as well as other occupations. What made you get out of broadcasting, Leanne? Why did you leave?
Well, it really wasn't a choice. This often happens in broadcasting. The station I worked for is sold once, then it's sold again, and then it's sold again. And the last set of owners, this often happens, they decided to basically clean house. And Kate called me in one day and said, your job's being eliminated. And I was like, okay, totally unprepared for that. But I had been doing a lot of writing, mostly short stories, some articles. And so when my job ended abruptly, I started concentrating more on my writing. And I did work in some other fields and various jobs, but the writing became the main focus of what I wanted to do. And it was a long road. It certainly didn't happen immediately, but I never gave up on it, which was something else I learned from my granny, to never give up.
Gotta love grannies, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
We gotta love those grannies. So how did you get into, before we start talking about, because you've got over 20 books. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this woman she is hell on wheels in the writing world. How did you get into substitute teaching, and what grades do you substitute teach in?
Okay, how I first got into it, I graduated from college, wasn't finding a job right away, so I did that for a short time until I got offered the job in broadcasting. Then I did it again the first year I was married, which was after I had no longer worked in broadcasting. Then I started having my kids, and I had a few years where I stayed home, but I still always wrote. 8 years ago, my son, he's now in 10th grade, way taller than me. He's grown up on me. But he was in 2nd grade, and I thought, well, we could use a little extra money around here, so I thought I'll do substitute teaching this year, see what happens. Well, 8 years later, I'm still doing it. I do mostly 7th through 12th grade, the older kids. I enjoy it, especially if I'm doing, most of the kids now know I write books. And kids will come up and say, are you the author lady? Yes. I've had a few English teachers who actually invited me to talk to their classes about writing, and the kids loved it and responded really well. So that's kind of a sideline I do to bring some extra money into the home, but I also still write. I will always write, no matter what else I'm doing.
Sandy, jump in with any questions you have, my dear, because I'm pretty sure you have some. So jump in here if you have one now.
I do have one, actually. I'd like to know what your road to publication was. How did you get your first books published?
Okay. I wrote, as I said, I had done short stories and a lot of articles. I've had various newspaper columns in the Southwest Missouri region for more than 20 years. When I had my twins, I realized my long-range goal was always to write fiction, to write novels. So I've got 2 baby daughters. They don't sleep at night. Everything is double feedings, double diapers. And I thought, if I don't do this now, if I don't get started writing novels, I may never do this. And I will be an old lady someday, and I'll be bitter because I never got around to pursuing my dream to write novels. So I started writing a novel. 2 infant daughters. Most of my family, friends, they all said, "You're crazy. You are crazy. This is no time to start this." I said, "It's the best time to start it." So when they went down for a nap, I would write. So I started writing, and I started stacking up. I had several manuscripts, and then I thought, okay, now I've written some. I need to start selling those.
Did you go through a publisher, or did you self-publish?
I did not. I have a few self-published titles. Then I went through a publisher. I started querying agents and publishers, and the first novel that I eventually signed a contract on is called Kinfolk. I queried probably, I think it was a total of 80 agents and publishers. I had a few nibbles where they were interested, but it never quite worked out. But I just kept sending it out and trying to fine-tune the manuscript. And one day I got a reply from Champagne Books, and they said, "We'd like to publish your novel." And I was like, oh, my gosh. And so I signed that contract.
If you had stopped at 70, your first book would not have been published.
That's right. And, sure, there were times I thought, should I give this up? But I thought, no, this is what I've always dreamed of doing. This is what I want to do. And so I just kept on until I got that first one. And then I was worried I would be what in the music business is called a one-hit wonder. And my uncle by marriage, Wayne Rigdon, was like, no, you've written one, you've got it accepted, you will write more. And I write, I believe I talked with this a little bit with Yvonne when I was on before, and the gremlins were driving us crazy. My historical romance I use a pen name for, and that pen name is Patrice Wayne. And the Wayne is to honor Uncle Wayne for encouraging me that I would not be a one-hit wonder, that I would be able to sell. If I could sell one, I would be able to sell more.
That's a nice tribute.
And tell Sandy and our listeners about this historical romance novels. They're all on ebook, right?
Yeah, all my historicals are only available as ebooks. Some of my contemporary titles are also in paperback, one in paperback and hardback. But my historicals are all under the pen name Patrice Wayne, and all of my historicals are with Evernight Publishing. I have the first one I did for them is set during the Civil War in Vicksburg, Mississippi, during the time of the siege. It's called Dearest Love, Do You Remember?, which is based on a song that was popular during the Civil War. And it's set during the siege of Vicksburg. I've been to Vicksburg quite a few times. One of my ancestors actually fought at Vicksburg, so I kind of had a little personal tie and an interest there. Then I have one that's called The Aviator's Angel, which is set in the 1920s in my hometown of St. Joseph, Missouri, where the heroine in it is a young lady who she wants to fly. Even though very few women were flying at that time, she wants to learn to fly, and she does. And on that one, I drew a lot from family history. The neighborhood that it's set in is not my old neighborhood, but it's my grandparents' neighborhood, and I listened to lots of their stories. I also did a lot of research. Anything historical requires absolutely tons of research because I very much want to get it right. One of the others is called Betty's Soldier. It is set here in Neosho, Missouri, where I now live. Camp Crowder was here during World War II and on into the early 60s. Camp Crowder is what Mort Walker based his comic strip Beetle Bailey on, and Camp Swampy in the strip is actually Camp Crowder.
Beetle Bailey, one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I was really fascinated. A lot of people did not make this connection. They do now because I've not only have the novel, but I've written various other things about Camp Crowder, the real Camp Swampy, and people were like, wow, they didn't know that, and they live here. I have one that's set in Oklahoma that's called A Desperate Destiny, which is a 1930s young man turns to robbing banks in desperation because he's losing his land. And that one has a little bit of a family tie, too. One of my great-grandmothers was from Oklahoma when it was Indian Territory. And then I have one more that is called Valley So Low, and that's set just after World War I ended. And that one's also set in southwest Missouri or the Ozarks region where I live.
And Sandy, like we were discussing earlier, Leanne, like you and I both do, does her research for these historical novels because readers are so historical savvy now and so, I don't want to say intellectual because that's an insult, but they're more educated in history that if the research isn't done, it's not credible. Am I right?
Right.
Right, exactly.
Right. I'm interested, Leanne, have you done, since you grew up in St. Joe, have you done anything on the Pony Express or considered doing anything on that?
I have considered it. I really haven't yet. But, yeah, that's where the Pony Express started. Their big slogan they've used for the last few years is, where the Pony Express began and Jesse James met his end.
My mother-in-law was born and raised in St. Joe. So we have
a title for your
an
book.
area in common. There you go.
There you go, yeah.
Go ahead, Sandy. I didn't mean to interrupt you, honey.
What is the most interesting or the hardest research that you think you've done on any of your historicals?
Probably, I'll start to say all of it. Probably the most difficult was Dearest Love because it's set in Vicksburg and I live in Missouri. But I made several trips to Vicksburg. But I did a lot of research into not only Vicksburg during the siege, but the Civil War, the soldiers, what they ate, what they wore, what the homes were like. And that took a lot of in-depth research. But I'm just very much, even in my contemporaries, I do my best to absolutely get every detail I can right because nothing can jolt me out of reading a book faster than to read something I know is absolutely wrong.
Me too. Although I have had some people counsel, if it's positive, keep it historically accurate, and if it's negative, then change the names, change the location, make things up. So I don't know if that's true in historical romance. In paranormal, that's what they said.
Probably. I imagine it's about the same. People often ask me, they tell me, I know who your character is. No.
Right.
Because none of them are based totally on any one person. They may have a little bit of a person, but they're all composites. They're all characters that I've dreamed up and fleshed out and created. But people will tell me, I know who that is. No, sorry, you don't.
So how much do you have left inside? I'm sorry.
No, I want that question answered, too. I'm very interested in that one.
That's something that I always want to ask, that I ask writers that are really prolific like you have been. How many ideas do you have left that you just have little germs done and
I have so many
story treatments, but nothing else.
I call them story starts, and I will put down the idea for a story, sometimes the characters. I probably could not stop and count how many what I call story starts I have. Even when I'm subbing, I take a notebook. I usually have a plan or conference hour, and I write ideas or I write scenes in longhand. I used to take my laptop till they decided they didn't want me bringing any of the subs to bring their personal laptops to schools, but still a notebook. And jot down story ideas, and I usually have more ideas than I have time to work on.
I think that is a very writerly trait. I know I find a lot of, in my life, I find a lot of what ifs. You know, Stephen King said he does that for his story developments. You see something happen and then you go, okay, now what if this was the result of it? Or what if somebody reacted this way? And I have a lot of those, I know, in my life. I bet you do too.
Yes, a lot of mine start with, what if this person did this thing? Okay. And then you go from there. The story just starts, building.
Do you ladies catch yourselves out and about, just say you're waiting on somebody, or you're standing in the grocery line, or you're standing in the post office line, and you see someone, and you immediately start building a story around that person, where they've been, what they're doing, who they are, and you're standing there writing this story in your mind, standing in line and forget where you are?
Oh, definitely, definitely. You get caught up in something and you think, oh, gosh, I'm really staring at that person. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. But they've just become a character that could be in a story or even a novel. Or I take snippets of conversation and I think, I've got to write that down. I have got to use that.
Yeah, I'm a professional eavesdropper. I can sit in the restaurant and listen to all the conversations going on around me, and sometimes even lean back a little bit, so you can hear a little more. Yeah, and those get, that's a great way to practice dialogue, is to listen to people talk out in public and then try to mimic it in your dialogue.
Oh yes, definitely.
If you had, and this is to both of you, if you had your time to go over again, because I know Leanne started writing pretty much as soon as you could write. You took Granny's stories to heart there at the beauty shop.
Oh, yes, yes.
But would you change the direction that you went in on your journey that led you to where you are today?
Probably not, because of all those experiences along the way have shaped me and made me the person that I am. And without some of the experiences, even the ones I might think would be better to not have experienced, they still have helped to make me who I am, to be part of me. And I might not be the same person or have the same capacity for story if I were to remove or change some of the elements along the way.
What about you, Sandy?
I would like to say that I would have changed things, but money was a motivator, and I made a boatload of money when I was working corporate, especially in sales, and that, as much as I hated doing it, and as much as I feel like it was kind of wasted time creatively, it got me to the point where I could retire early and say, okay, now I'm going to work on writing. So I probably wouldn't have changed it just for that reason. The only thing that I would have done differently is I would have, because I subbed, Leanne, I subbed to 5th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th mostly. So bless your heart for doing those older kids, because they can really be tough. But I probably would have used that 7 years of subbing time more wisely and done more writing during those first years, so, rather than trying to make it all up, after that. But other than that, no, I think I would have just kept on the way I was doing, because you're right. It all builds, it all molds you into the character that you are, and you wouldn't have the experiences if you left some of that out.
And getting back to substitution, Leanne, do you find that as you're teaching these children and subbing, do you find storylines in some of their lives or in some of the teachers' lives as you're watching them?
Anywhere I'm at, I'm going to find
all the time
storylines. Definitely.
Because God love you. I tried it once, didn't like it, so I didn't do it anymore.
It's not
I love
for
children.
everybody.
I love children, but far away. You know, come visit, go home. I had 3 because I didn't want more. Then I wound up with 3 more. So God love you for what you do, because those middle school kids, they're too old to be little ones. They're too young to be the big ones, and they're sort of like the middle child in a family. They don't really know where they fit yet. And in not knowing where they fit yet, they kind of want to spread their wings, but then when they spread their wings, they really don't want to spread their wings. And it reminds me of the little birds that run out to the ocean, and when the waves come in, they run back up to the sand where they're safe. So God love you for both of you for subbing for those children, because they need teachers like the two of y'all, especially with your creative minds.
We had one time. I in the district where I subbed the most, which is in southeastern Phoenix area. It's very, very heavily Hispanic. I'd say probably 65 or 70% Hispanic, because Chandler was an old farming town that was founded by Hispanic families, and so we had English as a second language for a lot of the kids, and the easiest way to help them become comfortable with English was in storytelling. So a lot of our writing exercises, where I would put something up on the board. I would put a line or a very short paragraph up on the board, and then the kids could either write or tell me the story and keep adding to it round robin from there. And we had some of the wildest. I mean, there was a lot of, gangs did this, and then they broke into the house and they took these people, and I told them, as long as it moves the plot forward, you can put anything in the story you want to, other than shootings and some kind of physical violence. Everything else goes. And they came up with some amazing stories in that 8th grade class. Blew me away.
What about you, Leanne?
Oh, definitely. That what she said is so interesting. I've been doing a lot of subbing for the ELL, English Language Learner kids here, because surprisingly, we have a really large Hispanic population in this corner of Missouri. We have a lot of Hispanics, we have a lot of Pacific Islanders, and we are beginning to get a lot of the Hmong people from Vietnam. So our community has really diversified in the last, say, 10 years. And so I do work with a lot of the kids, and it's really strange because some of the teachers, I subbed for a lady the other day who teaches ELL, and she told me what terrible children they were and how horrible, and they were wonderful and fantastic for me, and I had no problems with them whatsoever. But I do work with them on story, and if you can get them, any children of that age, one of the writing exercises I sometimes do is I call it We Build a Story. And I pick a child and say, okay, what would you like to start the story? And we just build it. And sometimes they do go in crazy directions, but the kids love it, and they learn from that more than they do from maybe a textbook story that doesn't relate to their lives. So it's really, that's really cool. And very synchronistic that we're both doing, or have done similar things.
Opposite
go ahead,
sides
Sandy,
of the
go
country.
ahead.
I was going to say,
and
at opposite sides of the country, too.
Right,
well,
exactly.
And you know why? Because you're both artists. You don't have a box. You think outside of the box, with what you do in your craft, and in doing that, you translate it to these children who think they've done died and gone to heaven because they have these great, strange ladies who's letting them tell these wild tales that nobody else would let them tell.
Right, exactly.
And
well,
who knows?
And sometimes as a substitute, you have a little bit more leeway because half the time the teacher doesn't leave a lesson plan, or they haven't gotten their lesson plan written far enough in advance so that it still applies by the time you get into the classroom. And so lots of times you're just kind of going on a guesstimate of what needs to be done and very low expectations, because lots of times when you're hired in, I hate to say this, but when you're hired in as a sub, they think, oh, well, you know, if she babysits and keeps the class under control, then we're good, we're par, and if they learn anything that day, then we're ahead. So anything that you teach, then the teacher comes back and goes, oh, my God, I can't believe you actually advanced the lesson plan.
Right, exactly.
Leanne, you've got over 20 books out, but I want you to get, in the time we have left, Slattery Sin. Tell the audience, this is the newest one, correct?
Yes.
Tell our listening audience about this book, because I'm not a romance reader, but this one even grabbed me in the blurb. So tell our audience about this so they can run right out and get it.
Yes, they should do that right away.
Absolutely.
Slattery Sin. Let's see, I will read the blurb here. Just give me a second to bring it down here. Okay, this is the cover blurb from Slattery Sin. Living in California, working undercover is still surreal for Louisiana native Pride Slattery. He stands out because of his unusual name, his military service in Iraq, and even his disability. Although he's never quite just adjusted to Los Angeles, he remains in place because he's lost any enthusiasm for the future. One day is just like another, and he schooled himself not to care. Things change, however, when he rescues a stolen purse for a beautiful woman, Sabetha Hill, who turns out to be from back home. He risks his heart for the first time in years as events propel him closer to an unexpected future. When he's billed as a hero at a traffic accident, Pride is unmasked as a federal agent, and danger looms for both him and his lady. Someone will live, someone will die, and whether or not there can be a happy ending rests in Pride's hands.
Sounds good.
Now, yeah, and like I said, I don't read romance, but I guarantee you had to do some research for this book, did you not?
Oh, definitely, yes. In the story, of course, Pride not only has a disability, he also suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I did a lot of research into that, but I became interested in the subject because one of my grandfathers was a World War II veteran, and he fought in the Pacific Theater of the War, and they didn't call it PTSD then, they called it battle fatigue or combat fatigue, but he definitely had it. And so in my story, even though it's a story and it's meant to entertain the reader, there's also kind of a message, what it's like to love someone with PTSD, what it might be like, try to portray what it's like for someone suffering from PTSD, to make those, because it's a real issue, and to bring that to a greater understanding maybe among people who have never been around someone who suffers from that.
Would you recommend this book for someone who is suffering from PTSD that there I go again, see, there's my challenge kicking in, that they might be able to better understand themselves? Because people with PTSD don't always understand why they have the triggers and why they feel, even with therapy, they don't understand why they feel like they do, why they have the triggers, or even how to move past the PTSD.
That's very true. Yeah, I probably would. One of my other novels, which also deals with PTSD, is called Devlin's Grace, and I actually had a young woman who had served in Afghanistan who contacted me after reading it and told me that I had got it so close to life, so realistic that she wanted to compliment me and thank me because I made it not such a stigma, but this is just a real thing that happens. It doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they are not not normal, that they suffer from it. It's a disease like any other. And that really moved me to hear from someone who suffered herself from PTSD to compliment one of my books and to say, you got this right and thank you.
I'll bet.
Go ahead, Sandy.
In the latest book, what did your protagonist use as coping mechanisms in the story?
In the early part of the story,
do?
he actually drinks too much, and he really has got to the point where he doesn't care. When he gets to know this young woman and he begins to care for her, he starts to learn to put away, not to use the booze as such a crutch to get through life. And he starts caring, he starts wanting to think about someone else outside himself. And then she is very helpful with him in that.
And again, that goes back to the question that I asked earlier. For someone who is living with someone who has PTSD, or even someone who has PTSD, it is a way for them to learn how to, and this is not the right terminology, but to let go and shed that cloak a little bit and understand it's okay to have the flashbacks, it's okay to have the triggers, but there's more to life than always living in the darkness. Would that be a fair assumption,
Yes,
Leanne?
that would be a very astute way to phrase that. Yes, it would.
Where can you be found on the Internet?
All right. I'm on Facebook. I have my personal page. I also have an author page, and that one might be easier for them to find because they don't have to spell Sontheimer.
I finally got that one right, didn't I?
Yes. My author page is just www.facebook.com/ and then all lowercase Leann, Leann, writer, because I thought maybe people could find that easier. They can find my books are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, always with it, all the romance sites. The publishers have them. Each of my main publishers now are World Castle and Evernight. I have author pages with both of those publishers. I'm on Twitter. I have a Pinterest that I pin all kinds of things besides my book covers, and some of them I do a series of pins for settings and scenes from the books, which some people seem to like. And I do a lot of other, like, recipes and just personal interest, too.
Well, have you got a new book coming out?
Yes, I do. Very soon I'm going to have, it's more of a novella, but it's a Christmas story, which, once again, kind of deals with the issues of PTSD. This one is called The Scarred Santa, and I just got the cover the other day. It was absolutely gorgeous. It's from cleanreads.com, which used to be Astrea Press. In The Scarred Santa, the protagonist is a young man who was, because in all my research for these other books, in addition to the PTSD, a lot of them have a lot of outward scarring and disfigurement. And in this particular story, the hero, whose name is Rafe Sullivan, came back from Afghanistan with some serious scarring on one side of his face. And he's having a really hard time of life, and he can't seem to hold a job. And his brother gets him a part-time, temporary gig of being the Santa Claus at the mall, because with the costume, the beard, the hat, it's going to cover most of that. And through the story, he basically starts to learn to accept himself as he is now and to let go of the past and who he was and to embrace who he is now.
When is that one coming out?
Very soon. I think around November 1st. And then the other one I have
a great
coming,
title.
Yeah.
It seems to a lot of people have been interested in that one. And then the next one I'll have coming out, I'm not sure if it's going to be by the end of the year or in January, is from World Castle Publishing, and it's called Canaan's Land. And it is set here in the area where I live. The Canaan in the title is a young man named Canaan Moss. I had a student who had that actual first name, Canaan, and I thought, I have got to do something with that name. That's really different and very cool and pretty cool. But Canaan is falsely accused of a crime, and he is trying to prove his innocence. And that one will be out, I'm not sure when, because the publisher's not sure when. It'll either be late this year or January.
Well, since you said that, I want to bring you back on February the 1st and launch that book.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, I got you down for 8 tonight on February the 1st. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right here. We're bringing Miss Sandy Wright back, and we're bringing Miss Leanne back. And, Leanne, real quick, I know you heard Sandy talk about, I always ask, what advice would you give someone if they said, I have a dream but? So give your advice of what you would tell someone, I have a dream but.
Her advice was so close to mine. I was sitting here going, yes. I tell people, I do get approached by people who say, I've always wanted to write, but, or I could write if I had time. I tell them, you have to just do it. Life's never perfect. You can't wait till there's not going to be a perfect time to start writing. If you want to write, you need to just start doing it. And even if you're first writing, I tell them, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just start doing it. And they'll say, but I don't have time. And I'll say, do you think I have time? But I make time. I tell them how I started writing novels with twin infant daughters and tell them, if I had time to do it, you can work it in somewhere. And you just have to stick with it and persevere and not be afraid of rejection. If I'd been afraid of rejection, my first novel would have never been accepted, and I probably would still be writing, but I'd be frustrated. But I kept with it, just kept on with it until I got an acceptance. So I tell them, just stick with it and write. You just have to write. And like Sam said, every day.
Every day. And that's true with anything. If it's writing, if it's music, if it's art, if it's a business, if it's a platform, if it's a passion, you have to eat, sleep, drink, think, dream that passion. And I tell this story all the time. I decided I wanted to do an online radio show. I've planned this for 5 years of my life. I've planned of doing this show. And that's all I thought about besides my writing. And, of course, the writing, it writes itself. I just say, okay, y'all go do this. I'm busy now. And they write themselves. But I wanted to do it so bad because I felt like that it was time to give back to all the people and all the people that had helped me and all the people that I didn't know yet but I was going to meet. Because when I started doing this, being an indie author was almost like having the Black Plague. You say you're an indie author, oh, that means you can't do it in the real world. Well, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but it's a little bit harder being an indie author. So I kept at it, and we lost Sandy again. I am so sorry we lost her because I love her. She's wonderful. But being an indie author in the early 2000s, well, even in the 90s when I started, was an impossible thing. You didn't do it. But we kept at it, and now we're finally respected in this business. But like Leanne said and like Sandy said, if we had given up, we would be so frustrated and so aggravated and so correct me if I'm wrong, Leanne, unfulfilled.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're trying to tell you is it doesn't matter what your dream is. If you want to be a garbage collector, which God knows we need them, they're important to us. Without them, our streets would be filled with garbage and rats. You work towards that dream, and you be the best at it that you can be. And never allow anyone to steal your dream, because they can't steal it without your permission. Am I right, Leanne?
That's exactly right.
What other pearls of wisdom do you have in the last couple of minutes that we've got left?
This is one of my favorites. This was handed down from my grandfather, and his big thing he said was, there is no such word as can't, because you can do anything. So, when faced with, women can't be in broadcasting, yes, I could, and I did. And, a lot of people in the early years would say, you can't get published. People just can't get published. Yeah, they can. So that's one of my favorites. That's one of my favorites is there's no such word as can't, because you can do anything. You just have to
matter of, and it's a matter of how bad do you want it? And you have to ask yourself that every single day, right, Leanne? How bad do you want it? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Off the Chain. I'm your host, Yvonne Mason. My guest tonight at 8 o'clock was Sandy Wright. For some reason, we lost her. I so appreciate her staying on and being my co-host tonight. She asked some very riveting and insightful questions and contributed a whole lot, and I so appreciate her. We lost her before I could tell her that. At the 9 o'clock hour was Miss Ann Sontheimer Murphy. And, Leanne, you are so precious. Thank you for coming back on after the gremlins and redoing the show with me and agreeing to coming back on my show. If you haven't read her work yet, go and get it, because it's even got
I actually wrote some of her titles down and wrote her down, and I'm planning to go grab some of her titles when I get off the air, because her work sounded so fascinating.
Oh, I'm going to tell you that the only book she's got out right now is Song of the Ancients, and you cannot put it down, because she takes Indian medicine men and witchcraft and paranormal and puts it all together into this beautiful, beautiful story that you can't turn the page fast enough, but you don't want to turn the page because you get through too fast.
Oh, I definitely will get it, because that sounds like absolute must-read. Absolutely.
And I'm going to get your Slattery Sin, because, number one, that sounds like a powerful book more than just a romance story. It's got a life lesson in it on how to be accepting of PTSD and not being ashamed of having it, and of having to learn how to let it go. And I know you can't always let it go, but shedding some of it and learning how to live again. Ladies and gentlemen, on Off the Chain, we talk about a lot of things, and most of my authors, in fact, all of my authors, when they write, they not only write what they know, but if they don't know it, they research it, and they research it to the point that they become almost an expert, if not an expert in it. And their books tell stories and life's lessons. So do yourself a favor. Go get Sandy's book, Song of the Ancients. Get Leanne's books. Her historical novels are to die for. And get Slattery Sin and read it. And if you know someone that's got PTSD, give them that book for Christmas or Hanukkah or a birthday. Or, heck, Halloween's next week. Give it to them for Halloween. You agree, Leanne?
Oh, yes, definitely.
And tomorrow night, my guest at the 8 o'clock hour, we'll only run an hour tomorrow night, is author Jennifer Chase. And now, Leanne, you got to listen in, because this girl's fantastic. She writes She is also a criminologist and a consultant, so she's fantastic. And she has a wonderful dog named Odin. But I want to thank you again for the privilege and the honor of being my guest and for doing the reboot. I appreciate you so, so much.
Well, I thank you for inviting me and having me back to reboot.
Well, you had to have your day in the sun. And ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow night, join us. This thing will go into archives. Share it. We have almost 5,000 listeners for this show between the archives and all the podcasts. So we're getting out there. Give me a call. Give me an email. Until tomorrow night, off the chain, Yvonne Mason, good night.
When you don't go to Geico.com, car insurance can be hard. Like early 90s heavy metal hard.
I'm yelling and screaming and I'm loud. Roar!
Geico makes it easy. You can review and update your policy or report a claim on Geico.com or the Geico mobile app. Because shouldn't we all have a little less stress in our lives?
I'm not even upset about anything.